this is a demo that shows you a slightly different aspect of how you would set up SMARTS, how we have customers using SMARTS for legacy modernization. And this is the same application, only we've added a little bit in terms of our dashboard reporting. So what you can imagine that I've loaded in is data, and I've got in my data, one of the things that I've got available is the results of execution from my legacy system. So from my legacy system, these are the results that the logic was producing. And what I would be trying to do is create my decision logic so that it matches the results that came from my legacy system as closely, I want to get to the same results in my decision that I have from my legacy system. So this expected decision outcome section is the results of execution from my legacy system, and then the actual decision outcome, so what my current rules are producing, is this section here, decision outcome. And I've got a metric that I created that will tell me whether or not my actual values match my expected values. And you can see that in this case, I have 80 that do match, but I've got 20 cases where we're not getting the same results as the legacy system. So what I can do is I've got some filters that that I define to help me narrow down to those cases that don't match. So for example, if I want to look at all the cases that don't match, I can apply this failed match filter. And now you can see now we're on document 2, and that we have these 20 documents that don't match. I can go through and take a look at the data in those documents. And so for example, here we expected that this would get thrown, this particular case should have been thrown out on eligibility with a reason of need a cosigner. But what we actually got was in our current rules have approved this case and said it was a high-risk case. So what I'm going to want to do is focus in on certain areas of the decision logic. So for example, I know that this one failed on an eligibility check. So I've got other filters where I could apply that tell me, find all of the cases that don't match for eligibility only. So I'm going to focus on eligibility first by applying that filter to look at only those, like this particular case, that don't match on eligibility. And now when I execute, I'll filter to just those that are eligibility cases. And you can see that now I'm looking at 11 cases where the eligibility of my legacy system doesn't match my current rules. So I see that this particular case in the legacy system got thrown out because it needed a cosigner, and we're actually approving this case. So if I go in and look at my eligibility rules, so let's just filter to the eligibility check, these knockout rules, and I can see what I've captured so far. So using SMARTS, usually the way our customers use SMARTS is they'll use SMARTS in addition to other techniques in mining rules from legacy code. So they might have captured certain rules from either documentation or from inspecting and identifying rules in the code and create some kind of a starting point. But I can see here that in this case, I should have had a rule that told me that I needed a cosigner, and instead I approved the case. So what I can look at is what my rule is doing now is looking for drivers that are between 16 and 18 and saying that they need a cosigner, and I didn't get that result. So I can go back on this case and I can look at my data. For example, I can say, let's look at the age on this particular case is 20, and my legacy system was throwing it out. So that tells me that the thresholds that I have here might not be the ones I want. So if I instead, let's say, this one didn't pass. So if I say maybe in our legacy system, I need to set my threshold higher based on my data, and I could create dashboard reports to help me do this. But let's say I make a change and I say that anybody under the age of 21 needs a cosigner, then I can go ahead and execute and see if that helps. And now this rule executes on this document. So what that's going to mean is that the case will now match. And if I look at my reports here, just that one change, now I have 10 cases that match and one that doesn't. So it tells me that, you know, that, and I would go through a process like this of looking at rules, looking at cases that don't match. I might want to look at my data a little more closely. So if I say, you know, what out of these cases that don't match, I could create a report maybe based on age. So if I create an age report in the dashboard, I can see what buckets, you know, what my age range is, and that can also help me decide where to set the threshold in a rule to match my legacy code. If I was missing a rule altogether, I would have the same kind of process I would go through, because I would be looking at the outputs. In this case, they're eligibility rules, so it's easy. If I had a message that was coming out from my legacy system that wasn't in my current rules, I would have to come up with a way to create the rules to match that legacy system, knowing that I needed something that said need a cosigner. Does that make sense?
Hello?
Hello?
Yeah, I got it. So it's like an iterative process where you'll try to filter, reach the expected output by adjusting certain parameters. So, and then in an actual project case where we want to find out the business rules used in the current system, we may have to go through each of these identified rules or these potential rules identified and then get verified by the current system specialists, right, or SMEs?
Yes. So you would start. I mean, you could start from the code itself, the legacy code itself, from documentation or from business experts, and start to capture some rules, put them into the product, and then start loading your historical data from the legacy system and seeing if you can, you know, where you're off, where things don't match. You can also, if you don't have any starting point, you can, with enough data, you can use Bluepen to get a starting point for your rules. But even if you use Bluepen, you're going to want to, continue to experiment with those rules, comparing your actual results to your expected results.
And Raj, just to sort of underscore the point Colleen had made about using Bluepen, if we were working with large amounts of data and large numbers of rules and so on, in this particular situation where there were mismatches, you could use Bluepen on those mismatches. So you may have actually got your original rule set from using some analysis tool that would, say, analyze COBOL or C or C++ and do some type of a way of creating a rule set from that as a starting point. And then, as Colleen had done, you could use, basically just analysis and looking at where the mismatches seem to be, what seemed to be causing them. But you could also use Bluepen to help derive where there'd be a correlation between where the mismatch was occurring and some other fields. I mean, here obviously we've got a dozen or so fields. It's not that many, but if you had a large number and you felt like there might be some correlation, you could use that. And that's generally what customers will do. It's a process where they'll use other tools. They take multiple steps. The most recent one, customer in New York, had a legacy system that they were using just under 1 million records as their way of testing the results. And they originally had, after generating rules from old code, they ended up with about a 40 to 45% mismatch, depending on what you use to do the matching. And they eventually got it down to less than 10 records were mismatches, and those records that didn't match, actually, they were found out to be errors in the old system and correctly done with SMARTS. And it was just an iterative process. It took, on that particular case, took them several iterations, several days to get through it, but it was very productive, using multiple techniques in the product, and they worked their way down to essentially getting no more mismatches.